Usually when a brand decides to design a watch, they start with the purpose of the watch. Is this going to be a dive watch or a field watch or a dress watch? And while that might be the most common way to design a watch, it's not the only way to design a watch. You could set purpose aside temporarily and instead focus on designing a watch based on a theme or on something in nature or even an event. And when you do that, it can push you to design something really unique and beautiful and different than you typically find in the watch category. Today we're checking out a watch that does exactly this in the L&MR from Hvlina watches. This is a Polish brand that took its inspiration for this watch from the opening of the first railway in Britain, the Liverpool to Manchester line, which is abbreviated the L&MR. And they've done some pretty interesting things with this watch. Probably the most interesting is that they included a key winder for it, which sort of evokes this time when train conductors would carry key wound pocket watches. Now, don't get scared off. You can also wind the watch by hand like you normally would, but there are a few other drawbacks and interesting quirks to this design. But on the whole, it is a very beautiful watch. So let's jump in and take a look. Hey guys, welcome back to Just a Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. And today we're going to be taking a look at a watch that is relatively affordable and yet has a very cool, very unique design that has actually won a couple of design awards both in the US and in Germany. This is from a brand coming out of Poland, and this is a watch that I would probably wear as a dress watch, but again, it sort of defies category because it is such an interesting and unique design. Before we go any further, I do need to mention that Hvlina did give me this watch to keep, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any additional compensation, nor did Hvlina have any control over the content of this review. Now, this is a very interesting watch that we're looking at today from a design standpoint, and so I want to kind of break this review into two sections. I want to start by talking about the design of this watch and how they brought the story of the first steam engine rail line into the design of the watch, because this is a watch that has taken many of its design inspirations and cues from this very specific event in history, and it results in a very beautiful, very unique piece. But then after that, we do need to talk about how this actually functions as a watch, what the experience is as a timepiece, because on that front, I think they might lose a few people. This is a very beautiful watch, but it does sacrifice a lot of conveniences that you normally find with automatic watches. So definitely make sure you stick around until that part later on in the video. But let's start by talking about the design of this watch. Now, this watch is manufactured by a company called Hvlina, which is currently based in Poland. If I've got the story right, they were founded back in 2014, originally in Belarus, and that's where they get their name from. Hvlina means minute in the Belarusian language. They went through a reorganization in 2020, and they're now currently based in Poland. And it's always cool to see watch designs coming from other parts of the world. Different cultures and countries all have their own design preferences, so it's really cool to see how that filters into something like a wristwatch. Now, the watch that we're taking a look at today is called the L&MR, which is a reference to the opening of the world's first Manchester to Liverpool railway that was run exclusively by steam engines with no horse-drawn carriages. So basically what you might consider the first true railway line in history. And apparently there were a number of different steam engines that ran on this line. Each of them had different names like the Lion or the Swiftsure or the Rocket. And so Hvlina has come up with a number of different colorways for the L&MR collection, each one named after one of these steam engines. We are looking at the Rocket today, which is a silver dialed edition. And unfortunately, since each colorway is limited to only 200 pieces, the Rocket, the silver dial, is already sold out. However, there are still a number of other colorways available, including a green dial, a cream dial, and your classic black dial. Now, these watches are jam-packed full of interesting little design references and cues to this historic event. And I'm going to start with what I think is the most interesting one, that being the 12 o'clock crown that comes with a key winding system. This is reminiscent of the pocket watches that would have been used back in the 1830s during this time period when the first rail lines were opened. many of which were wound with a key. But this is also meant to overcome one of the interesting design choices, that being to place the crown at 12 o'clock. This is a very thin watch at only 10 millimeters, and so there's not a lot of room for that crown to sit on the side of the case. And as a result, that strap makes it very difficult to access. It is possible to wind it with your fingers, but it's not easy. And so as an alternative, you can use this cool little metal key that's included with it. It fits inside the crown and allows you to wind it with the key. And this whole system is definitely something that we need to talk about when we get to the usability side of things. But it does make for a very interesting and unique design touch, and certainly makes using the watch more fun and tactile. But for me, that novelty did wear off fairly quickly. The next thing that really caught my attention is the case shape and design, which is something that I really like. This is a rectangular shaped watch case, which is already cool, but the way that they've designed the lugs and the case itself is something that's really unique and beautiful. It almost looks like the lugs and the case are two separate pieces, with the rectangular shaped case suspended between these two rails on either side. And this illusion is made especially strong at the top and bottom of the case as the lugs completely disconnect from the case itself and wrap around to meet the strap. Hvlina says that the case design was inspired by railway bridges, and the look really suits this watch well. The finishing on the stainless steel case is polished all the way around. It has a high quality look and feel to it, and I think it suits the kind of dressy aesthetic of this watch. Likewise, I really love what they've done with the dial design and the hands and markers on this watch. Running vertically through the central portion of the watch are these engraved railway lines, which call to mind the maps that you would see in a train station. The dial also features very beautifully designed custom hour markers, half of which are perfectly intersected by those railway line engravings on the dial. When I look at these individual hour markers, especially the ones that are sitting on those engraved train tracks, it sort of reminds me of boxcars. And I see the same motif in the hour hand of the watch, which is segmented into 3 sections like a train with 3 cars. On the other hand, the minute hand looks like a long train track. A final interesting flourish on the dial is the red marker at 27 minutes. This is a reference to the fact that these original steam engines only ran at 27 kilometers an hour or 16 miles per hour. It's very subtle, but it does add a really small pop of color to what's otherwise a fairly monochrome color scheme. Finally, these watches are offered in a dial with an open heart, which is what you see on this review watch here. There's a little cutaway around 3 o'clock on the dial that exposes a part of the movement that allows you to see into the balance wheel. And this watch is powered by the Miyota 9029. So this is one of Miyota's premium movements in their 9000 series, very similar to the 9039. But this is a no-date version with a skeletonized balance wheel so that you can have an open heart dial if you would like. Usually I prefer a standard dial, but in this case I liked the open heart, and that was due to the fact that they opted not to put a second hand on this watch. So that's a very classy and traditional thing to do on a dress watch, to leave the second hand off. But without a second hand, that means the watch will look pretty static on the wrist. You won't be able to perceive the movement running at all. So I think the open heart is a good trade-off there, where you can see that the movement is working, that it's wound, that it's running. Now, on the one hand, it's a little bit unfortunate that there is no second hand on this watch, because that's one of the features of the Miyota 9029 or the Miyota 9000 series movements, is that they do have a very smooth sweeping second hand, which you won't see on a watch that doesn't have a second hand. And if you flip the watch over on any of the options, you're going to see a very nice see-through case back that will give you a good view of the movement as well. And on the back of the watch, you can see another kind of historic touch. As mentioned, each colorway is named after a different steam engine that ran on the L&MR line. And they've printed an image of the steam engine that corresponds with the name of your watch on the rotor of that Miyota 9029 movement. The specs also kind of clue this in as a dress watch. There is no loom on the watch anywhere, and the water resistance is only 50 meters, which is a fine level of water resistance for a casual watch or a dress watch, but lower than you would want if you're going to wear the watch in any kind of an active environment. The last thing I want to talk about is the strap on this watch, which I think is perfectly matched to the watch. It's a genuine leather strap, but it is a high quality one. The leather feels very supple and looks very nice. The underside of the strap is backed with a red leather, which I think looks really sharp and again, really fits with this kind of dress watch aesthetic that they're kind of going for. And leaning into that even more is the fact that the tail of the strap comes to a point rather than being rounded. That's something you don't see very often. And again, I think it just adds another element of dressiness to the watch. The custom buckle is polished, matching the finishing on the case, and it's a very high quality buckle as well. And another thing that is very important about this strap is that it includes quick release spring bars. And in the case of this watch, this is not just about convenience. It's not just to make it easier to switch to different straps. Quick release spring bars are actually necessary to the function of this watch. And that's going to lead into one of my biggest problems with this watch. But before we get into those, let's summarize where we've gotten so far. This is a very beautiful watch. It features very high quality finishing, a very nice movement inside of it, and a very cool, very thoughtful design that draws elements from a specific historic event, that being the opening of the first real train line in the world. And it references that event in a lot of very unique and interesting ways. The L&MR collection has a full retail price of 492 euros, which is about $527, but there are a number of colorways currently available on pre-order for 369 euros or around $395. And given the uniqueness of this piece, the level of quality in the finishing and the manufacture, as well as the movement inside of it, I think this is a very fair price for this watch. However, I do feel like this watch is something of a niche piece. If you are looking for a beautiful dress watch and don't have much of an interest in the history behind this watch, it's probably not going to be for you. And that's because while the design is extremely cool and unique, it also creates some major inconveniences in actually using and wearing the watch. The biggest being the crown at 12 o'clock. Not only is it cumbersome to wind the watch, or you have to either kind of squeeze your fingers in between the lugs or use that key, which is a little bit awkward and slow to actually wind it with, but the crown cannot be popped out while the strap is installed. This means that in order to set the time on the watch, you have to remove the strap from the upper side of the watch. And that's why the quick release spring bars are essential to the proper function of this watch. With quick release spring bars, it doesn't take that much longer to take the strap off and set the time. But to me, it does show that they put style and form above function here. The second concern that I have about this watch is the size of it. This is kind of a difficult watch to classify, but most likely you would probably wear it in situations where you would be wearing a dress watch. But rectangular cased watches wear very large, and so while 39 millimeters across doesn't sound that big on paper, it actually is pretty huge on the wrist. This is further accentuated by the 51 millimeter lug to lug, which is also on the long side. And so while I have a large 7.5 inch wrist, even though the watch comfortably fit my wrist, it still looked really big for the style of watch that it was. And so I think what you're left with after all this is that this is a beautiful commemorative timepiece first and a wristwatch second. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, it's just going to limit who this watch is for. If you have a particular interest in the history of locomotion, this is something that will be very cool for you. Or if you have an interest in beautiful product design, I think this is another thing that would be very appealing to you. And in fact, watches from this collection have won a number of international design awards. So if you're someone who appreciates beautiful design or the history of these watches, you might be willing to put up with the inconveniences that come along with it. But if you're primarily looking for a nice looking dress watch, this might not be worth it for you. Again, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing about this watch. You just need to know what you're getting and whether or not that's for you. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up for today. Thanks for watching. Definitely drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this watch. And how do you feel about watches that take inspiration from themes or events rather than designing a watch around a specific purpose? To me, this is one of the things that's so interesting about watches, where you can have just completely different starting points from which to create a watch design. And I can definitely see the appeal of having a piece like this in your collection, something that might have a real personal connection to you because of the theme or the event that it's tied to. But I'd love to hear from you as well, what you think about that. If you're interested in purchasing this watch, I think this exact color combination is sold out, but they do have some other ones available. So I will leave a link to Hvlina watches down below in the description. And if you want to get a watch-themed t-shirt or hoodie like this one, you can pick it up on my website at justthewatch.com. I've also got a lot of written reviews there as well, so check it out and let me know what you think of that. Anyways, that'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.